Hi there, it's Pete Thorn. Welcome to my demo of the Line 6 Helix. And I'll just get this out of the way right now. I think this thing is fantastic. It just sounds great. It's incredibly easy to use and to learn how to use. And just a ton of R&D and thought obviously went into the design of the unit, as well as the sounds and the tones available. So big props to Line 6, because they just did a really terrific job on it. Very forward thinking, and I'm just really impressed with it. Probably took me about 24 to 48 hours to learn how to use without barely cracking a manual. It's just very intuitive and simple, and I'm just really enjoying using it. So the purposes of this demo, I didn't want to attempt to describe every single feature on it or anything like that. There's lots of videos and information on the Line 6 website where you can go and check that stuff out and find out everything this thing's capable of. What I wanted to do is come up with a cool track and then try and utilize the Helix in a whole bunch of different configurations on the tones within that track. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I wanted to do was use it as a pure modeler, so all the sounds coming out of the Helix. I also wanted to integrate it with some different guitar amps and use it just for effects. And because this unit allows you to host impulse responses, which is like speaker simulation, I wanted to use it with an amplifier, a load box, take a line out of the load box into the Helix, and then use some speaker simulation in this device to add the cabinet sound and come out of the Helix into my recording interface. And yeah, so I just came up with a whole bunch of different configurations and different guitar tones, because what I'm trying to demonstrate in this video is really that this device was designed to fit into your guitar rig and your guitar playing life however you envision it. It's you know, really forward thinking that way. Line 6 knows, I guess, that not everybody just wants to do the pure modeling route these days. They maybe want to use some effects out of a unit like this and integrate that with their guitar amp. So they've given you the ability to do that. They've included effects loops on this unit, 4 loops, so that you can insert some pedals and use it with your favorite pedals. There's relay channel switching jacks on the back here, so that you can actually channel switch your amp with this unit as well. So they've obviously thought a lot about integrating it with different types of guitar rigs, and then of course you can use it as a traditional modeler if you want as well. So in that track at the beginning of the video, there's 9 distinct guitar parts and tones, and I'm going to break them all down for you now and show you just how cool this thing sounds and how you can use it in so many different ways. So okay, let's get started. So for tone number 1, or the part that starts off the whole song, I'm using the Helix as an amp modeler, all the sounds coming out of the Helix. So I've got an amp model block loaded up, and I've also got a impulse response block loaded up for speaker simulation. So more about that in a second. Let's talk about the amp model for a minute. I'm using the Brit Plexi Brt amp model. I've got it set up just on the edge of breakup for a kind of Hendrixy thing. That's what I was going for, sort of Hendrixy neck pickup on the Strat. Clear, but just with a little bit of breakup when I dig in. So that amp model sounds just great to me for that. Now, as far as the speaker simulation goes, I think it's just great that Line 6 has given us the ability to load our own or our favorite impulse responses into the Helix and use them with any guitar amp setup, a traditional amp and cabinet, or a modeling setup with some speaker simulation. I think the cabinet sound is like half of the amp sound. It's that huge. So the fact that they've given you the ability to load some of your favorite cabinet simulations into this unit and use those is just huge to me. I'm a big fan of the Ownhammer impulses. So I loaded up the Helix with a whole bunch, like 75 different Ownhammer impulse responses right after I got it. And yeah, they sound just great to me, and very familiar because I'm used to using them. So really nice feature that you can do that. So I'm utilizing a, what is it, a G12m blackback style speaker, a 77 blackback loaded in a Marshall 412 1960B style cabinet, and that's the speaker simulation sound for this particular tone. As far as the effects go, I've got the transistor tape model loaded up here, and it's running in front of the amp for just a bit of tape delay. You hear me switch that in at the beginning of the part. Also, you hear me switch in the plate reverb. It's real nice ambience going on there via the plate reverb. And then halfway through the intro, I switch in the vibe. It's just a terrific sounding, really authentic sounding vibe in the Helix. And I just love vibe. I love that tone. So really great that it sounds good. And all right, let's check out that part soloed outside of the mix now. For tone number 2, I also went the modeling route. So I've got an amp model loaded up and an impulse response once again for speaker simulation. For this tone, I was going for real clean, compressed, with chorus and some delay and reverb, just real patty kind of sound where you could like strum a chord and it would just ring out and be just beautiful. And I'm doing it in mono actually because I double tracked this part and hard panned it left and right. What have I got going here? It's the Essex A30 amp model, so AC30 style model. The impulse response is once again an Ownhammer, and it's of a Celestion Alnico silver style speaker in a 1966 Marshall 212 cabinet. One of my favorite impulses for this type of tone. As far as effects go, I've got the red squeeze compressor loaded up in front of the amp. I've got a 70s chorus loaded up as well in front of the amp, and then coming post amp or after the impulse response block, I've got the Adriatic delay, which is a bucket brigade style modulated delay, and I've also got a chamber reverb loaded up. So let's check out this sound now outside of the mix. Tone number 3 is once again a modeling type sound. So I've got the Brit Plexi amp model loaded up, and once again it's the Ownhammer impulse of a greenback style speaker in a Marshall 412 cabinet. I've got the gain set much higher on the amp, and I was going for a dirty rhythm sound on my Strat with this tone. Let's check it out. So for tone number 4, I'm using a real amp and I'm using the Helix for speaker simulation. So how did I do that? Well, I'm plugging my old Strat into my Suhr SL68 amp, which is like an old Plexi. I'm taking the speaker out of the SL68 into my Suhr Readine Load, which safely loads the amp down to line level. I'm then taking the line level out on the reactive load box and I'm running it into the auxiliary input on the back of the Helix. And I've got an impulse response block loaded up in the Helix. And once again, I've got the greenback G12m in a Marshall cabinet impulse response loaded up in the impulse response block. So long story short, you're hearing real amp loaded down to line level into the Helix, and the Helix is serving speaker simulation duty in this tone. Okay, here we go. Tone number 5 is a modeling type sound, so I'm using an amp model and impulse response once again in this tone, and this is the first sort of lead part that comes up in the song. I wanted to go for a real sort of psychedelic fuzzy kind of tone, so I loaded up the Octavia style fuzz, and what am I doing? Also the transistor tape delay. The amp model in this sound is the Interstate Zed model, which I think is supposed to be like a Supro style amp. And what else have I got going? I got a little bit of room reverb coming after the amplifier. And yeah, that's basically it. So let's check out tone number 5, soloed outside of the mix. Tone number 6 is once again in modeling tone, where I'm using an amp model in the Helix for the amp tone. So this is one of the hard panned rhythm guitars that play underneath the last solo of the song. So I was going for a little bit harder edged, heavier rhythm type sound. I played my Les Paul for this part. The amp model is the Brit 2204 style amp model, so JCM 800 style amp, a little bit heavier, a little more modern than the Plexi sound. Still using the greenback style speaker in the 412 cab Ownhammer impulse response for speaker simulation, because I just love that one. Now I'm using some effects on this sound, just a little bit of reverb and delay. So the delay is the duct delay, just got a little bit of that mixed in. And then I've got a bit of plate reverb blended in as well. I'm running these in a parallel path to the main amp and cab sound, so I'm just blending them in and kind of a wet, dry, wet sort of style configuration. Real nice thing about Helix is the ability to kind of route effects in parallel or in series or whatever you want. It's just very simple to set up sounds and the routing of effects. Okay, so let's check out tone number 6. Here we go. Tone number 7 is a real amp sound. So for this particular tone, I set up the Helix in 4-cable method, and that means that I'm running my guitar into the Helix, coming out of the Helix into my PT100 guitar amplifier, coming out of the effects into the PT100, back into the Helix, back out of the Helix into the effects return of the PT100, and then I'm actually miking up a real speaker cabinet for this sound. So you're hearing a Celestion Vintage 30 style speaker mic'd up for this tone, and Helix running 4-cable method. Really easy to set this configuration up in the Helix, no problem at all. So I was basically going for a companion sound to that last tone, tone number 6. I wanted to do a similar thing, but use a real amp and cab, and show you what that sounded like. So I'm using just a little bit of reverb and delay in the effects loop of my PT100 amp. Once again, it's the duct delay and the plate reverb, basically the same sound setup as for tone number 6. Okay, let's check out tone number 7 solo to outside of the mix. Tone number 8 is the second solo that plays over top of the dirty strat rhythm parts, and this is once again a modeling style sound, so I'm using an amp model. It's the solo lead OD amp model, so I think that's like a SLO style amplifier. And impulse response for this is actually, it's an Ownhammer, but it's a 212 Bogner cabinet loaded with a 25 watt Celestion and a V30 type Celestion, and they're blended. So I just wanted to try a different impulse response for this sound. I've got some effects going on this one. I've got the Script Mod phaser, which is like a Phase 90 style phaser. Sounds really good to me. And also the Scream 808, so obviously a tube screamer style, to just push the front end of the amp a bit and get a little bit more drive and sustain. I'm using the simple delay for the majority of the solo, and also I'm using a bit of plate reverb. Now right at the end of this lead part, I reach out and hit the unit, and you'll see me turn on another delay because I just wanted to have some delay tail over into the next section. So I loaded up another simple delay, and it was off for the majority of the solo until right there at the end, and then I turned it on. Okay, let's check out this part. Last but not least, it's tone number 9. This is the last part in the song. It's the last solo that plays at the end of the tune, and the routing's kind of crazy for this sound, so bear with me here. I really went for it on this one. I wanted to use a real amp for this sound, so I used my PT100 signature amp from Suhr. I wanted to run some effects in front of the amp, including a pedal. And I didn't want to use a real speaker cabinet for this particular tone. So once again, I'm employing the Suhr load box, loading the amp down to line level, and then using impulse response block in the Helix for speaker simulation. So the routing is like this. I'm coming out of the guitar into the Helix. In effect loop 1 of the Helix, I've got my Suhr Koko boost loaded up, which is a real nice mid-range boost. I love what it does for lead sounds. Right after the effect loop with the Koko boost in it, I've got the throaty wah loaded up in a wah block. And I just love the way the wah-wah sounds in the Helix. You'll notice I played this part standing up. I had to get my butt out of the chair and play standing up so I could use the wah and turn it on and off. But yeah, the throaty wah sounds just terrific. So after the wah, I've got a send coming out of the Helix running into the front end of the PT100 and a nice lead sound dialed up on the amp. And then I'm running speaker output of the PT100 and into my Suhr reactive load box, loading the amp down to line level. Coming line out of the reactive load, back into Helix, and then I've got an impulse response block loaded up there for speaker simulation. Once again, it's an Ownhammer impulse, but this time it's a black back style selection speaker in the 212 66 Marshall cabinet that the Ownhammer guys have. Right after that, I've got a bit of delay and reverb loaded up, so post cabinet sound. I've got the duct delay for a little bit of delay, and the plate reverb loaded up. Now right at the end of the tune, I hit these 3 kind of close intervals as harmonics and at the end of the solo, and then I drop down with the whammy bar and I turn on the cave reverb. I've got that loaded up, and I just hit the foot switch for the cave reverb, and you hear the harmonics tail over into the end of the song. I just love that sound. I blended in the cave reverb via a parallel path on Helix and blended a whole bunch of it in, and I just love that tone. It sounds really cool to me. It's exciting. All right, so let's check out this sound soloed outside of the mix. Here we go. So for the last guitar part in the song, it's back to tone number 1. I sort of finished where I started. It's that Plexi amp model, using a little bit of vibe, a little bit of echo, a little bit of reverb. So yeah, basically I've tried to show you in this video that you can utilize Helix in a gazillion different configurations. Whatever your brain can dream up, it seems to be able to do. And I just think that's super cool. So imagine this, maybe your main setup is a head and cabinet. The amp's got an effects loop in it, so you can run the Helix 4-cable method, run some effects in front of the amp, run some in the loop, and you mic up the cabinet, and that's the way you do the majority of your gigs. But imagine maybe you've got a casino gig or a church gig or something like that where you can't use a speaker cabinet on stage because they just want like no stage volume or whatever. Just get a hold of a good load box, copy all of your presets in the Helix over to another bank, and simply insert on all your presets an impulse response block where you load up a virtual speaker cabinet. Now you've got 2 different scenarios you can use the Helix in, with the cabinet and without, with the same amplifier. Now imagine this, maybe you got to fly cross country somewhere and go to a fly date somewhere, and you don't want to deal with, flying an amplifier or renting a backline amplifier or something like that. Simply copy all your presets again to another bank and insert in the presets an amp model block that's similar to the amplifier you're used to using. And so now you've got 3 different scenarios or setups, so 3 different banks that you could use the Helix in. And the beauty of it is that all your workflow or your pedal pushes will stay the same. Turning on and off stomp effects or post effects, or using the expression pedal. You don't have to get used to some other workflow. It should all remain relatively consistent. And I just think that that's really cool. I can't think of another device on the market that you can do that with. So I think it's somewhat revolutionary and a really, really cool thing that they've enabled us to do with this unit. So I find it really exciting, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you like the track I came up with. If you have more questions, check out Helix further at the website that you see there on your screen. And hey, I am Pete Thorn. Come back and see me for more videos real soon. Hit subscribe if you haven't. I'd really appreciate it. All right, have a good day. Over and out.